Some stories don't sound scary when you explain them out loud. They sound like nothing, like a misunderstanding, like a weird coincidence. But the problem is, when you're the one standing there in the dark and you hear something in the woods repeating your voice back to you, the logic leaves your body fast. Tonight I'm sharing two true horror stories that both have one thing in common. Something out there wasn't just watching, it was listening. And it was learning. So if you're alone, if you're wearing headphones, and you're anywhere near a window, you might want to lock it. Let's get into it. Story 1. The whistling that answered back. I don't really have a clean explanation for what happened, and I've spent a long time trying to force one. I've replayed it so many times in my head that the memory feels worn down, like a coin that's been rubbed smooth. But the parts that matter are still sharp. I was 18, freshly graduated, 1 foot out the door of my hometown and 1 foot still stuck in it, doing the same jobs I'd been doing since I was 14. My grandfather owned a few acres of farmland outside of town. Nothing huge. Cows, a couple barns, a few fenced fields, and enough dirt roads that you could get lost if you weren't used to them. During my senior year, I worked for him after school. He didn't like being out there in the cold, and he trusted me enough to handle things alone. Most days, it was simple. Fill the buckets, feed the cows, check the gates, make sure nothing looked wrong. It was early November, which meant the days were short and the evenings came fast. Baseball practice ran late, 3:25 to 5:30. By the time I drove out to the farm, the sun was already dying, and the world had that dull gray color it gets right before dark. The kind of dark that makes everything feel farther away than it really is. One evening, I pulled up, parked by the first barn, and started my routine. Boots, gloves, buckets, feed. The first field was fine. The cows were restless like they always were, crowding the fence, snorting, shoving each other. I dumped the feed into the trough, listened to them chew, then went back to the truck to head to the second field. That's when I realized I didn't have the key. The second field had a locked gate because my grandfather didn't trust people not to mess with it. If you didn't have the key, you couldn't drive through, which meant I had to do it the hard way. The feed trough was maybe 40 yards from the fence. 40 yards doesn't sound like much until you're carrying heavy buckets through uneven ground in the cold, doing 2 at a time, over and over. I remember feeling annoyed, not scared, not uneasy, just irritated. Like, of course I forgot the key. Of course I'm doing extra work. Of course it's almost dark. I started whistling. It wasn't a tune. It wasn't a song. Just something random. Something to keep my mind busy. A habit I had when I was alone. I carried the buckets from the fence to the trough, dumped them, went back. Again. Again. The crunch of my boots on the dirt, the wind, the distant lowing of cows, and my own whistling. On my last trip, I set the buckets down in the truck bed and took a breath. My hands were cold even through the gloves, and that's when I heard it. A whistle. Not mine. It came from the neighboring property. The property next to my grandfather's was mostly woods. Thick trees, no houses, no lights, no driveways, just an old fence line and a slope that went up into the dark. The whistle was faint at first, like I almost imagined it. I froze and listened. It whistled again. Same style as mine, random, no melody. I stared into the trees. My first thought was a bird, a mockingbird maybe. I'd heard them imitate things before, car alarms, other birds, even bits of human noise. So I shrugged it off. I got in my truck and drove home. The next day, I didn't whistle. I didn't even think about it until I was halfway through feeding the cows and heard it again. That same faint whistling from the trees. It wasn't exactly copying me anymore because I wasn't making noise, but it sounded like the same kind of whistling. And over the next few days, it kept happening. At first, it was far away. Then it sounded closer. At first, it was faint. Then it got clearer, until it reached a point where I could tell it wasn't a bird. It was too clean, too controlled, too steady. It sounded like a person standing somewhere in those trees, whistling softly to themselves. And it always started when I was alone. Never when my grandfather was with me, never when I brought a friend. Only when I was out there after practice, when the sky was dark and the farm felt empty. After about a week, I got used to it. That sounds insane, but you know how it is. The human brain adapts. If something doesn't hurt you the first few times, you start treating it like background noise. I even started expecting it. Then one evening, it didn't happen. I noticed right away. I fed the cows, locked the gate, walked back to my truck. No whistle. And I remember feeling disappointed. Like some part of me had started thinking of it as company. That's how stupid I was. That night, I had the key. I walked up to the gate, pulled my key ring out, and started fumbling for the right one. My fingers were numb. The metal felt like ice. I dropped them. They fell into the grass. I sighed, annoyed, and without thinking, I muttered, "Damn it." I crouched down, using my phone light to search. The grass was wet, cold. And then, from the woods, I heard something. Not a whistle. A sound like a low groan, almost like someone clearing their throat. It was faint, but it was there. And it was getting louder. I didn't feel fear right away. I felt curiosity. The dumb kind of curiosity that makes you do things you regret. I stood up, leaving my keys in the grass, and walked down the road a few feet toward the property line. The fence there was old, easy to climb. I hopped over. The land on the other side sloped uphill and was heavily wooded. The trees were close together, and the ground was covered in leaves that muffled my steps. I took maybe 10 steps in. That's when I smelled it. A weird mix of garbage and wet dog. Like something had been living out here, rotting. The groan came again. Closer now. I kept walking, and then I heard a voice. "Damn it!" It was slow, dry, distorted, like an old man who'd smoked his whole life. But the words were mine. I froze. It said it again. "Damn it!" Then again, faster. "Damn it! Damn it!" The tone changed each time. And that's when the realization hit me so hard, I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't just repeating the words. It was copying the way I'd said them. The frustration, the pitch, the rhythm, like it had recorded me. I stood there in the dark, staring uphill, my phone flashlight trembling in my hand. I should have run. Instead, I kept going. I don't know why. Pride, anger, that same stupid curiosity. I crested the hill slowly, leaves crunching under my boots. The smell got worse, and the voice kept saying it. "Damn it! Damn it!" Each time more accurate, more like me. I stepped forward, lifted my phone light higher, and said, "Hey, this is private property." I didn't finish, because the light hit something. A figure, squatting in the leaves maybe 10 feet away. At first my brain tried to label it as a person, but nothing about it fit. It was naked. Its skin was pale and stretched too tight over its body, ribs visible, arms too long, legs bent in a way that didn't look natural. Its head was wrong, too slender, too large, like it had been pulled upward, and its eyes reflected my flashlight like an animal's. I stood there, locked in place, and in that moment, my body recognized danger before my mind did. The thing's neck moved, not smoothly. It winched like a machine. It snapped its head toward me without moving its eyes first, and I swear, the way it looked at me felt like being inspected, like it wasn't seeing a person. It was seeing something to study. There was a short silence. Then, like a robot starting up, it turned its body slowly and began to stand. It was too tall. It rose higher than it should have. And the whole time it kept its hands at its sides, fingers curled slightly, like it didn't know what to do with them. I took one step back. It didn't move toward me. It just opened its mouth. And in my own voice, perfectly, it said, "Damn it." That was it. My brain finally caught up. I turned and ran. I sprinted downhill so fast I almost fell. My legs didn't feel real. It felt like my body was running without me, like I was watching it happen from somewhere else. I didn't look back. I heard leaves shifting behind me. Not footsteps exactly. More like something sliding through them. I reached the fence, threw myself over it, slammed into my truck, and peeled out. I drove home with my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. I didn't tell my grandfather. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my friends. Because what was I supposed to say? That I saw a naked man in the woods? That something copied my voice? That I ran away like a little kid? I kept working there. And for months afterward, I didn't whistle. Not once. But every now and then, especially on nights when the sky was gray and the farm felt too quiet, I would hear it. A soft whistle from the trees. Not a tune, not a song. Just something random. Something that sounded like it was waiting for me to answer. Story 2. The night my father carried what was left. My father told me this story exactly once. He didn't tell it like he was trying to scare me. He didn't tell it like a campfire story. He told it the way you tell someone something you've kept locked in your chest for years, only opening the door because the weight has gotten too heavy. I was maybe 12. We were sitting in the garage, the door half open, winter air creeping in. My dad was cleaning an old shotgun on the workbench. The smell of oil and metal filled the space. I asked him if he'd ever seen anything in the woods. I meant it as a kid question. Like, have you seen a bear? A mountain lion? Something cool. He didn't answer right away. He kept wiping the barrel, slow and careful. Then he said, "Yeah." And I remember the way he said it. Flat. Like the word didn't mean what it normally meant. I laughed a little and asked, "Like what?" He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's face. Not jump scare fear, not panic, the kind of fear that's cold and deep. And he said, "Something I don't have a name for." He told me it happened when he was 13. Back then, his family lived on a dairy farm in Ohio. They were poor. Not the kind of poor where you have cheap food and old clothes. The kind of poor where you don't always eat. So they hunted. Coyotes were worth money. $50 a skin if you knew where to sell. Sometimes deer if they got lucky. Anything to stretch the week. One night, my father and my grandfather went out together. They didn't have a truck. No ATV. They walked. 2 miles into the woods in the cold with a .22 rifle for my dad and a shotgun for my grandfather. It was late, midnight, maybe later. The kind of night where the moon makes everything silver and the shadows look like holes. They were almost done with their rounds when they came across something in the woods. Blood. At first they thought it was a deer kill, but the closer they got, the worse it became. The blood wasn't in one place. It was everywhere, splattered on trees, in the creek, in the grass. And then they saw what was left. 3 deer. Not eaten, not dragged off, torn apart. Heads separated, legs thrown into brush, a torso split open like it had been ripped by hands. My father said predators don't do that. Coyotes hunt clean, wolves hunt clean, even feral dogs hunt clean. They kill to eat. This was different. This was violence for the sake of it. My grandfather told my dad to go home, but my father refused. He said he wasn't walking 2 miles through the woods alone, so they stayed together, and they followed the blood trail. My father told me he'd never seen his own father hesitate before. But that night, my grandfather kept stopping, listening, like he was trying to hear something beneath the normal sounds of the woods. Then the woods changed. At first it was subtle. The birds. Birds don't fly at midnight. Not like that. But they did. Flocks of them. Bursting from trees, slamming into branches like they didn't care if they hurt themselves, just trying to get away. Then the animals. Coyotes ran past them. Not hunting, fleeing. Deer ran past. Rabbits, foxes. Even wild hogs. Animals that should have been eating each other, all running in the same direction. My father said it should have been obvious then. Whatever they were following, everything else was running from it. But they didn't turn back. They kept going. The blood trail led them into an open valley. Normally it was a soy field, but out of season it was just dirt. And in the moonlight they saw tracks. Not deer, not bear, not human. The tracks were shallow, like whatever made them wasn't heavy, but they were spaced too far apart, like the thing was taking long strides. And there was something else. The tracks weren't messy. They looked placed, like the thing wanted them to be seen. My grandfather crouched down, touched the dirt, and whispered, "Stay behind me." He told my father the plan. If it was a rabid dog, they'd shoot it. Keep shooting until it stopped moving. If it got to him, my father's job was to shoot or stab it off. They followed the tracks up a hill toward an old schoolhouse. Half of it had been ripped apart by a tornado years earlier. No one lived there. Sometimes homeless people used it. As they got closer, they heard a sound. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a scream. It was 2 sounds at once. A high-pitched screech layered over a low, wet rumble. Like something was trying to make 2 different voices come out of the same throat. My father said it made his teeth hurt. They got within 20 yards and the sound changed. He described it like paper tearing mixed with water sloshing in a bucket. My grandfather raised the shotgun. Then he hesitated, because in the moonlight, the thing looked almost human. It was hunched over a carcass, pale skin, arms and legs like a person, but wrong. Its fingers were too long, and the tips ended in dark claws. Its back moved like it was breathing too hard. Blood shone on the bricks around it. My grandfather didn't want to shoot a person, so he cleared his throat. And the moment he did, the entire woods went silent. Not quiet, silent. No wind, no insects. No distant animal noise, like someone had turned the world off. The thing stopped moving. Slowly, it turned. And when it faced them, my father said he understood immediately that it wasn't human. Its eyes were too deep. Its mouth opened too wide, and when it screamed, it sounded like the air itself was ripping. Then it launched, It didn't run. It jumped. It crossed the distance in a second. It hit my grandfather and knocked him down. The shotgun went off. My father didn't know if it hit. The thing didn't react. It started tearing, not biting. Tearing. Claws digging into flesh like it was peeling fruit. My father shot it with the .22, point blank. 5 rounds. The bullets barely made it bleed. The thing didn't even look at him. Like he wasn't worth noticing. It kept ripping. My father described it in a way that made me sick even as a kid. How it started at the chest, peeling skin away. How it went for the throat. How it clawed the face. How it didn't stop. Somehow, my grandfather got his knife into its shoulder. The thing shrieked, not in pain, in anger. And in that moment, my father grabbed what was left of his father and ran. He said he didn't remember picking him up. He just remembered suddenly feeling weight on his back and hearing the thing behind him, crashing through trees like someone was swinging an axe into every trunk, branches snapping, wood splitting, that horrible 2-layered scream echoing behind him. My father ran toward the nearest house, their landlord's place, half a mile away. He burst into the yard where the landlord and a few friends were drinking around a campfire. He screamed for help. They rushed toward him, and then the landlord said something my father never forgot. "What's that on your back?" Because in the firelight, they could see the flannel shirt my grandfather always wore. But there wasn't a full body inside it. My father collapsed, crying, screaming, trying to fight them when they pulled him inside. Because he still believed somehow that his father could be saved. But the truth was already there. My grandfather had been dead before my father even lifted him. They locked the doors, turned on every light, loaded guns. Someone called the police. 15 minutes. That's what they kept saying. 15 minutes. Outside, they saw it. Walking past the fire. Tall. Pale. Moving wrong. One of the men whispered, "It looks like an ape." Then something slammed through the window. They fired. But it wasn't the thing. It was the landlord's dog. Just the body. No head, no legs. They shoved furniture against the doors. Then they heard movement in the garage, metal tearing, glass breaking. The garage door groaned like it was being peeled open. Then silence again. Not the normal kind. That same impossible silence. And then a crash upstairs. A shriek. But this time it didn't echo. Because it was inside the house. They rushed to the stair door and held it shut. The thing pushed from the other side. Wood bending. A shotgun blast tore through the top half of the door. Splinters flew. They unloaded into the gap. And then nothing. The police arrived at sunrise. My father didn't speak for weeks after. He said the official story was a wild animal, a bear, a wolf, something that migrated. The idea that these things are rare, and you just get unlucky enough to cross paths with one. Or the idea that they've always been out there, right outside the light, and most of us just never notice. Because once you've heard something mimic a human voice perfectly, once you've watched the woods go completely silent like nature itself is afraid, you don't really get to go back to normal. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload.